It's a great pleasure to be here with you in Kerala, wonderful state that I have not visited now for some years, but that I carry great memories of. So I'd like to thank Ravichandran ji for inviting me to speak today with fellow humanists, rationalists, science popularizers. And I do that with great pleasure, of course. I am speaking to you from Melbourne in Australia, where it is just turned midnight. So in a classic reversal, instead of the audience, perhaps the speaker will fall asleep while talking. If that is the case, then you should just say good night to me. Well, friends, as I said, it's a great pleasure to be with you. I asked to speak about pestilence and, of course, Pride and Prejudice. And I can add a lot more other things to that, including panic. And we saw one special panic reaction to the new coronavirus, and that was in Mumbai, including the Consul General of China. Some politicians from India gathered together along with some Buddhist monks and started chanting go corona to the virus. As you can expect, it did not work, really, because the virus does not speak English. It is a virus from China and probably would have understood Mandarin better than, let's say, English. And the venerable monks probably tried Pali, but that did not work either. I was for 63 days in Big Boss house a couple of years ago. I'm used to looking at the world from that experience with some indifference as things keep happening. But I also know that when you are in Big Boss house, you are given regular tasks by Big Boss. I think all of us now are in Big Boss house and we are being given tasks to perform on a regular basis. So it's interesting to observe how things are going around us. We see a huge number of social issues coming up while we are locked in our houses in an attempt to protect ourselves and others. So when we talk about this particular pestilence, it might be helpful to put it in some perspective, because this is not the only pestilence that humanity has seen. And not only that, this is not the most dangerous, at least so far. We know that gods had been promising pestilences to people on a regular basis whenever they did not follow God's orders. We also know that large-scale epidemics, even pandemics, led to accusations against the rulers that they were not following God's orders. So we know that, for example, when Emperor Justinian was in power, and there was a big pestilence, people started blaming the emperor, and that really led to the beginning of the weakening of the Roman Empire under Justinian's control. Epidemics and pandemics throughout human history have caused people to show very strange reactions. But several of those reactions were because people did not know the cause of the problem, the epidemic or the pandemic. And then we saw people blaming the sinfulness of the human, the anger of the gods, the immorality of humanity. And then they tried to rectify it. Of course, some of the more educated knew how to respond to this with a twinkle in the eye and a prayer in the heart. In Italy, in the 1600s, that's already 300 years after the big Black Death, the bubonic plague of the 1300s, had killed half of Europe. So in the 1600s, we see that Samuel Pepys was recording what was happening around him in London, where a quarter of London had perished because of the plague. Strangely, he was recording deaths and life, and he was carrying on with his extramarital liaisons and recording the deaths and the burials in the night. He was less talented than the author 300 years before him, Boccaccio, who wrote the Decameron. The Decameron is a collection of 100 stories narrated by 7 women and 3 men who ran away from Florence city. And there they told each other 10 stories every day. Stories that were of love and revenge and licentiousness. So different people were able to react differently. And like Boccaccio, some produced classics that humanity would treasure. And then we have in 1940s, towards 1947, the extraordinary writing by Albert Camus, the Nobel Prize awardee for literature later on, who wrote La Peste. La Peste is a book that I read as part of my French language studies, and it's translated as The Pestilence. A pestilence is a large-scale disease, a pandemic, usually the plague, which takes over more than one country and probably kills massive numbers of people. So Camus situates his story in the town of Oran, imaginary situation and town in Algeria, because that is the connection for Albert Camus. And there, it is not entirely clear if he is really talking only about the bubonic plague, which kills half the population of the town, or if he is talking about the number of plagues that have been there with humanity and that will keep coming to humanity. And perhaps allegorically, Camus was referring to fascism. He was referring to the loss of humanity. Whether it was allegorical or not, simply reading this frightening novel showcases to us the various responses that human beings are capable of giving in the face of such a crisis. The most memorable dialogue in that is the one about the doctor, the famous doctor, Dr. Rieu, and Dr. Rieu in The Pestilence, La Peste, of the French writer Albert Camus. He's asked, what will be the outcome of the plague the town is suffering from? Where initially rats came out, they had a drop of blood coming out of their noses, they dropped dead. And within weeks, the population of the city, of the town, also started dropping dead. And he says, we don't know. But the one thing we know is we should be all decent. So his interlocutor asks, what do you mean by decent? And Dr. Rieu memorably says, I don't know in general, but for us, for me, it is to do my duty. In the fits of crisis, we are called upon to perform our duties, to handle the situation as best as we can. And there, with the consciousness, the knowledge, and the expectation that a massive crisis like this will encourage and stimulate not only the most noble of us all, but also revive the ancient prejudices and the primitive injustices of the history of humanity. Unfortunately, we see that happening. When first was announced the novel coronavirus problem in China, it was considered by the rest of humanity as simply a Chinese problem. Soon after, they said, oh well, it's for those who eat bats and who eat their food uncooked, it is not going to touch us. And then, when it was found that it wasn't stopping there, that it was gaining strength, people started saying to themselves, it will not affect us, especially in India, in Europe, and in North America. People thought that they were not exposed to any danger. In India, we were told, sadly, horrifyingly, that this pestilence will not damage us, will not affect us, because we are Indians, we have special immunity. And out came, crawling from the woodwork, the preachers of spirituality, so to say, claiming that India as the world's teacher will teach everyone how to escape from the death embrace of this surging pandemic. Already in January, the World Health Organization had alerted the world. By the end of it, it said it's a health emergency. In February, it started telling everyone the window of opportunity was closing. Governments had to act, and this would attack people irrespective of belief and race and nationality. No one listened to them. Many were proud of their ancient heritage, their belief, their religion, and these idiots finally had to bite the dust when on the 11th of March, World Health Organization had to declare this a pandemic. But people were continuing. People were going on with this delusion, even though some had to keep quiet. Out came from the woodwork also the homeopaths, and the naturopaths, and the ones who said turmeric and ginger and sugar pills, and the demented who started offering the excretions of animals, of the cow, as an answer to coronavirus. People splashing themselves and drinking, holding Gomutra parties at the same time that the Taglibi Jamaat was organizing its meetings in Malaysia first with 16,000 people, and soon after in North India, in Delhi. In South Korea, one of the church founders who believed in the infallibility of his faith started talking about not having to have masks and any personal protection because the Lord shall take care of us. At the same time, some of the Christian pastors outside China started saying, look, you suppress Christianity in China, now you're suffering. Forgetting that soon after and a little before, intimations of infection were already being seen in Europe, and especially in Italy, the seat of Catholic Christianity, in that fake country called Vatican, the Holy See, which is ensconced in Rome, also being affected by coronavirus, which was not sparing even the Christians. And then the Pope, the Vicar of Christ himself, had to go into self-isolation. Now, everything was tried, every prejudice, every arrogance, every bombastic statement, saying that this is not our problem, it is somebody else's, till humanity was brought to its senses, that no one can escape the inevitable problems that come with something like this, which does not discriminate against anyone on the basis of religion or caste or nationality. Albert Camus, to my mind, said something extraordinary in his novel. One of the dialogues refers, I translate freely from French, where one of the characters says, humans are dying, I hope humanity will survive. Humans are dying, but I hope humanity will survive. That humanity has been under challenge in our country, where conscious, vicious, malicious efforts were put to target one section of our society as the cause and the reason for the widest spread of coronavirus. Even if that were true, to not recognize that someone who had contracted a disease without knowing it would be its victim rather than its perpetrator consciously, to not show any sympathies towards them, is a failure of our humanity. Secondly, we had a challenge of public policy, public health policy, as to how we should go forward. Are we going to do it with testing? Will we have a vaccine soon? And so on. when panic takes over, rational thinking is the first casualty. Like at the time of the eclipse, people run into their houses and lock themselves up. So did we in this case. But the second one was based on medical advice, not simply out of fear. Because the history of pandemics around the world, pandemic is around the world, throughout human history shows us that quarantine was the first effective way of protecting ourselves. And so it was. And the word quarantine is from quarantaine, 40 days, 40 in French, Latin connections. So in 40 days, the virus, the bacteria, actually when quarantine was introduced, people had no clue about bacteria and virus. At one point, people thought that cats and dogs were the transmitters of this evilness, and they slaughtered them en masse. But this quarantine, the question from Riju in Calicut comes at the absolute right time. Who should we be quarantining? Is it the entire population or just the vulnerable? I believe that in a country like India, where we have nearly 40 crores or 35 crores illiterate, to implement an enlightened policy that would assist the public authorities would be really very difficult. But I think where the population is able to follow the instructions and is willing to implement them, the Swedish model would be good. Also, I want to draw your attention, friends, to the case of the Diamond Princess cruise ship. Diamond Princess is the only example of an uncontaminated sample of people infected by the novel coronavirus. We know that the coronavirus in animals was discovered already in the 1930s. We know that the coronavirus, its various kinds, were already being studied in the 1960s. We know that already, of course, after Michael Crichton's own novel, the coronavirus was being studied for at least the last 6-7 years, with the expectation that it might jump from an animal to human and then lead into human to human transmission. This much is true. But the one isolated, insulated, pure sample to study the effects of the coronavirus was the Diamond Princess cruise. Why is that so? 3,700 people, including the personnel on the ship, most of the passengers being of the elderly kind, were in the ship when the virus and the related illness was identified there. Now, as soon as panic set in, the authorities onshore in Japan and elsewhere said they will not allow people to disembark. So here was a ship with 3,700 people in it, with no escape from the ship and no inflow from outside into the ship. Now, in this case, it was found that only 700 were actually infected and carried the disease. So, elderly population, 3,700 of them, the virus was easily passing from one to the other, and only 700 were affected. The rest of the 3,000 had the virus but did not give in to it, had developed the antibiotics, the resistance, and some cleared the virus. Now, of the 700 who contracted it, 7 people died. You can count all the 7 in the ICU and say 7 out of 7 died and give a 100% case fatality mortality rate. Or you can look at 700 being infected and saying 7 of them died. Or you can take all the 3,700 and say in society of 3,700 people, you have 7 people who died. Even one dead human being is sad, is obviously a tragedy. But then, if it is not outside the statistical figures we have from Europe for regular flu, then the response should not be too dramatic and too drastic. Now, is this really flu? No. Flu doesn't kill. Flu does kill old people, but not as a necessary consequence and not spread like how it is spreading, this COVID-19. Definitely they are different, they are not the same. And one should be under no illusion that this is a harmless virus. It's a very contagious, nasty piece of molecule that is enacting its struggle for existence and found the human as the right space in which to enact that battle. Now, there is this figure that we have to consider and not let panic take over. However, I also believe that in the case of epidemics, while we can always analyze, we should all fall in line with national policies that are instituted on the basis of scientific advice. No one can do what they want. And then we depend on epidemiologists to find out when exactly the virus might abate. All the time, depending on possible achievements of scientists to find a cure, which in this case has been on some promising note, but it still will take at least up to September before the first results of the human trials will be out in Oxford. Israel has announced today, the 6th of May, that it has found a way forward. Australia has been giving hints. And surely there will be a way forward. This virus is not killing everyone it is infecting. That is for sure. So the response has to be measured and proportional, proportionate to the crisis in hand. Now, while this is happening, as I said a long time ago, human sin, humanity's depravity, and God's anger were indicated as the causes for large-scale wiping out of populations. Black Death in 1300s in Europe wiped out half its population. When European conquerors went to North America and South America, they carried with them smallpox and syphilis and various other diseases that they had developed immunity to. So it was not an attempt to exterminate other populations, but their simple introduction of these pathogens into populations that had never been exposed to these virulent agents led to wiping out of those people. From 500,000 people in certain large tracts, swaths of geography, populations were reduced to 500. So it has wiped out people like that. In this context, we have to fight those who are spreading nonsense and ignorance, because that can lead to complacency in public health policy. Let us not forget that the great Mandela successor, Thabo Mbeki, proposed lime juice as an answer to the problem of AIDS. Let us not forget that when HTLV3, which Robert Gallo named and later became HIV, when scientists were warning us in India that we have to take care about this, we have to address the problem. We were told Indians were moral, they will not have extramarital affairs, there are not many homosexuals in India, and therefore this virus is not a danger for us. When you don't know what is causing a problem, you wouldn't know how to address it. Now, I've already mentioned the homeopaths and the Ayurveda chaps who are now prohibited by the government of India from offering anything that promises immunity or cure. But we also have astrologers who have been telling us that the Grahakutami, the meetings and confluence and alignments of planetary bodies, some of them unreal, some of them they call shadow planets, shadows of what we don't know. They are saying that this virus is caused because of this positioning of the planets in a particular alignment. Apart from this errant nonsense, they have also been predicting the end of the virus. Some have been using peculiar, mischievous tactics to promote their business, including the parents of a 14-year-old child, Abhigya, in Mysore, who they are claiming, and there are over 10 million views to his one video, where he is supposed to have predicted coronavirus, but neither the word corona nor the word virus is mentioned in what he said in August last year, where he predicted a world war, where he predicted a very high oil prices, and we know where they are, and gold prices and silver prices going up. From there, and even he predicted, if that were right, that it's by April that it would subside. There are other charlatans who have predicted that 1st of April, some have predicted the 1st of May. All of them make their predictions from ill-informed articles written by uneducated journalists, uneducated in science and skepticism. So this is in parallel what is happening. In a very religious society like ours, people's minds are being pushed towards fatality. We have seen many interviews on television of people who said it is God's will, nothing that humans can do or will do will stop this virus. Therefore, not accepting or taking responsibility for the spread of the virus. This is the danger that fatalism poses. Now, the question is it practically possible to implement? What is your opinion on Sweden's strategy to defend the pandemic COVID? Is it practically possible in a populous country like India? I believe either for good or for bad or worse, the present social distancing policy, while many of us are very sincere and following the instructions of the government, there is a lot of people who are not following this. And because of fomites are objects and things in daily life which have suboptimal, nice thing, low levels of viral infection, which many people are being exposed to and beginning to develop some kind of immunity to that. E.M. Muralidharan is asking, hello sir, how do you think the fundamentalist religious leaders will try to bounce back from their setback post-COVID-19, where modern science seems to take all the limelight? This much I can tell you, Muralidharan ji. After COVID-19 was announced, hospitals started opening up and temples started closing down. We know that the priests have also been in quarantine. We know that the Pope, the Vicar of Christ, as I reminded, according to Catholic Christianity, had to go into self-isolation. We know that holy water for communion, which was kept in churches, was taken away. Churches, temples, mosques, places of massive congregations of people are no longer available. So that's one thing. Second, if it is God who has been visiting humanity by first his threats and then his actual carrying out of the threats by sending us all these pestilences, how is it that the gods themselves are away from all this because their temples are closed? And have you seen this? What should I say? This is absurd. When we say absurd, I think of again Camus and his novel, where he is portraying, though he refuses to accept the title and the description of absurdity, where he's capturing the desolateness of humanity and the vast indifference of nature to human belief and human action. Because even good people and bad people, if they are not smart, will be equally, provided genetically they have the same susceptibility, will be equally vulnerable to this. So, the thing that made me smile wryly is this. Have you not seen that those pictures in temples where masks were put on idols of gods as well? That tells us something. Unfortunately, there is a tendency in religious circles by religious leaders where as soon as science finds the answers, they will come with a reinterpretation of their plasticky dead languages and conjure up a new meaning for an old word and say, this is our answer to this pestilence. Our ancestors already did predict this. Now, talking of predictions, there are people who tell us that Nostradamus, the guy from France, already predicted all this. Now, you ask them to show the quatrain, the the poem, the stanzas, where he has predicted this, and they will actually invent those and throw it at you. The Indian soothsayer, Veerabrahmendra Swami, Telugu, is supposedly the one who spoke about Korangi. And they say, how different is that from coronavirus? So he said it, and he said it comes from the east and it comes from a poisonous wind. But till now, we know that coronavirus does not necessarily pass through the wind. It is carried through droplets, especially when you cough and sneeze, from our respiratory tracts. But wind is not its major means of carrying, of carrying from one to another. And anyway, if it came from China to Japan, it did not come from the east. China is to the west of Japan. Then there are people who will keep telling us that we told you that there would be a health problem. Now look at this. No astrologer worth his salt will finish his predictions without telling us that there will be a great disaster, that there will be suffering, that there will be setbacks. They will not tell you where, they will not tell you when, they will not tell you what. But they will make predictions of these things. We would say these are nonsensical statements, dangerous statements, mischievous in intent, aimed at getting the panicked people to come to them for remedies. Tell me of one astrologer who does not predict a tsunami after 2006. Before 2006, there have been no serious numbers of astrologers talking of tsunami because they never heard of it till December 2006. So we have to prepare ourselves to address the forces of darkness who are trying relentlessly to capture the loyalty and the trust of people by making false claims. Jayakrishnan Sridharan ji is asking, wouldn't continuing such stringent lockdown measures destroy the world economy and push millions into poverty? Would the cure be a bigger problem than the disease? It's like this. The virus and its clinical life cycle is not completely understood or studied. There are rumors, there are apprehensions, and there are fears. One of the rumors was in South Korea, people who had been infected once by this virus, after they clear it, will be again susceptible and have been reinfected. As once a student of microbiology, I did it for my first degree. I was very skeptical that this could even be possible. But researchers and scientists said it, so we have to just listen to it. Now it has been clarified that that was false. That is not the case. We don't know if really there are so many mutants and if they are infecting the way they are. There was this other question that came up which said that the virus is susceptible to heat. The WHO, I would like all of you this Sunday to go out onto your terraces, to light a lamp, to take a vessel that makes noise and bang it loud as a tribute to the WHO. This is your task given to you by Big Boss Babu Gogineni. To celebrate the work of WHO, which is under attack by a huge number of idiot right-wing anti-science politicians. It is a great tragedy that at a time of such crucial developments in the world, many of the world's leaders come from this category of anti-science people. The WHO has conducted studies and said heat has no real perceptible effect on the virus. But the fact is that in Maryland, already last year, a study was done and it was found that the virus was sensitive to higher temperatures. How high the temperature should be to deactivate it, to denature the molecule, is something that is not very clear. So I would say we have to talk to the experts. I am not one, but I, to some extent, understand what the experts are saying because of some small level introduction to the subject in my college days. Steel vessels or cast iron vessel or seasoned ones. Kirti Darsiji, you can choose all of them. And if you want to know, in the year 169 of the Common Era, when the virus visited us, by us I mean humanity, from what is today called Babylonia, went up to Egypt and came into Rome, partly by human commerce and travel. People took vessels, pottery, and smashed them into pieces. Now, imagine that there is this very desperate population, not knowing what is killing people at hardly any notice. It was considered that it may have been bubonic plague. Plague is of two kinds. Now, if the bacterium affects your lymphatic nodes, your lymph glands, and makes them swell and then infects them to an extent that it causes pus and extreme pain, ultimately leading to your death, that would be bubonic plague. But when this bacterium goes up to the lungs, almost certainly it will kill unless antibiotic treatment is given, because this is not a virus, but a bacterium. And when it goes to your lungs, then human to human rapid transmission is possible. But it is believed that the pandemic of 163 Common Era, year 163, was bubonic plague. And in Babylonia, where people did not understand, like nowhere people understood till the recent discovery in humanity's history of microbes. Their way of responding to this was to clear the atmosphere, and then they started smashing their vessels, and they thought this was an answer. Ajay Verma says, WHO is a joke. The joke is on you, buddy. The WHO is not a joke. The WHO has been warning. The WHO has been alerting. WHO has been telling the countries of the world to follow its guidelines, to take steps. It said that the window is very small, and countries did nothing. And the Secretary General had to declare a pandemic on the 11th of March, after the WHO repeatedly told people that something seriously wrong was happening. Ajay Verma says, didn't China cover up about virus and corrupted WHO? It possibly is a fact, But I want to know, how do you know that they covered up beyond what is said in the newspapers? In the newspapers, we were fed a huge number of things as information. I am not for conspiracy theories. The next question, Ajay Verma, you should not ask me if man landed on the moon. Conspiracy theories are basically a disease. Now, if China covered up, it seems it's likely it covered up because first a doctor was disciplined, a doctor was punished, and then it admitted that there was a problem to hand. Because information is not freely exchanged with the outside world by China, you may, not without reason, suspect the numbers of fatalities and so on that the country has been putting out. What does that prove? It proves nothing. To say that China has corrupted WHO is to speak like Trump, who is a fool. Salim Sayed is asking, Sir, shall I go Sunday midnight 12 a.m. on terrace to bang vessels or for the light? Oh, I think we must all join hands and do it all the time till the virus goes. Who knows? Just the noise we make might drive it away. Yes. I think to invite an entire nation, a whole population, to fall in step with a national mood, to feel together as one in a fight against a dangerous pathogen is an important thing to do. However, those actions have to be meaningful as well. If those actions were meaningful, like, I'm no fan of communism, but like in Cuba, they got the whole country to teach everybody. Watch the propaganda film, The Teacher from Cuba, and you will see how all the adult population, which is literate, was recruited to educate, to first make literate and to educate people. If only the 40 odd days that we had were used to educate the vast numbers of badly educated and as many illiterate people in the country, compliance with public policy would have been easier. While I say I am not a communist, I'm not even a sympathizer, I will also say that at times of great emergencies like this, the government should be allowed, should take the powers to commandeer the resources of society, to take over all the residential accommodations available in the country, hotels, or even motels and rooms, even if they belong to the places of prayer. Train people on an emergency basis on how to handle a possible pandemic. What if this virus does really mutate? To help them meet the crisis. To ask for all the hotel rooms in the country. And this brilliant idea that train bogies can be converted into mobile hospitals, where we pull in our national resources and we get people to learn and to teach the hygiene to be followed and the principles that need to be adopted by all of us to stop this virus from spreading further. Instead of that, we have been revealed to be a nation and a society which has huge numbers of people addicted to liquor who had to come out to go by what they had been addicted to. But then we are in this overall context of temperance on 2 days in the year, and the rest of the days the governments having to live on the immorality of making people become addicted so that revenues would sustain government activity. Vishwanath Jayanti says WHO is the successful organization of UNO. I completely agree with that. And if there are failures of the WHO, then we should all make sure that we make it work better by giving it more resources, by giving it the important recognition that it alone is the one which has been the weathercock for the entire world to exchange information. On the one hand, you have presidents of countries promoting malaria medicine as an answer to this. You have people with vested interests, people who have invested in those industries, in those pharma industries, who are promoting this. On the other hand, the WHO is ours. It belongs to humanity. Try to own up to the one single international institution that is working for us in our favor, instead of capitalist investment and investors who are trying to promote their remedies. In Australia, somebody has been promoting a particular medicine. He has been challenged by the authorities as well. Sravanti Prasad is asking, in India, one by one, government is planning to open everything by June. Is it safe? I think on the one hand, we have what has happened in Sweden. On the other hand, we know how it is in Australia, where there is no total lockdown. In Australia, I am living in a partial lockdown. You can walk down in the streets in small numbers. If you're family members, that's fine. But if you're not family members, it should not be more than, I think, 5. You can go shopping, but you have to keep your distance. The government is rolling out an app, and the app will sense through Bluetooth when you come close to other people with mobile phones with the app. If you spend 15 minutes or more with that other person, then if one of you has COVID-19, then the government knows how to trace and help the other people who possibly were exposed to this. Places of unnecessary congregation, like sports event stadia or dance bars or pubs and restaurants, have been closed. And yet the kitchens of restaurants are open so that the need for food is still met. Sweden, of course, people have to learn and see what that means, because the fatality rates of Sweden are not very different to the fatality rates of Germany and other countries where initially, at least, very strict lockdown policies were implemented. Now, I did mention to you the story of a diamond princess. 3,700 people, 700 infected, 7 died. So 7 out of 3,700. Does that require the lockup of all the 3,700? Or does it require the protection for the most vulnerable? These are inputs for public policies. I am of the opinion, but I don't have expertise. I am talking about my understanding. My opinion is that there is more panic than there should be about this virus. We probably all have had it. Testing 8 billion people in the world is impossible. Testing 1.3 billion people in India is impossible. So to that extent, a lockdown such as has been implemented so far seems to be a practical. I wouldn't know if it's medically the right decision, but it was the only practical one available to the authorities in India, I believe. And there is the prediction, or at least the understanding, that if you take care of it for 70 days, then you probably won't hear of it again anymore. Think of SARS. After its season, we have not heard of SARS again. Let us remember that. The Middle Eastern Respiratory Syndrome. We don't hear of it anymore again. So we have to look at the course of the life of other similar viruses. So to that extent, if we have been through this far, with the right support to all the vulnerable people, and let us not only expect the government to do this. This is a crisis that belongs to all of us, and it challenges us to do what we can, even if it means feeding a hungry family outside our own once every day, even if it means contributing our might to help improve things in society. We should all do it. This is not simply for governments. But of course, when, like it happened yesterday, liquor shops were open and people just went in like they were trying to buy tickets for a blockbuster movie, all the efforts by 1.3 billion people in the country can be nullified by such inept way of handling things. About that, there is no doubt. Ravi Kumar Valyavitil is asking, how do you interpret the mathematical model of COVID and the anticipated trend of growing number of patients? I'm not an expert in statistics, so I'm afraid I will have to pass that question. But it is clear that exponential increase is expected. What this exponential increase will do in a country where 65% of the population is below 35 years of age, that's nearly 90 crores of people who are below 35 years of age, is to be seen. If the Maryland study that heat is a deterrent because it's lipid covered, and like fat which is heated, if the envelope of the virus is softened and made tender, and then it can be damaged or denatured quickly, those are things not completely agreed upon. There is no consensus in the scientific community. That might already help. But the WHO said so far there has been no such evidence. No evidence to steam destroying it, and so on. But coming back to the mathematical model, I would imagine that model will also depend on some of these factors I mentioned, which seem to be at this moment variable. Vishwanath Jayanti, thank you for that nice formulation. Solution is to implement care, not to propagate scare. That is true. We should all be responsible. We should try to educate as many people as we can. The routine and the regimen of washing your hands with alcohol-based sanitizers, or at least 20 seconds of washing with soap, is definitely not to be dispensed with. And coughing into your elbow rather than out in public without any prevention of the expulsion of droplets which might be carrying the virus. Wearing of the face masks, these are going to remain with us. Now, I see a lot of ill-informed, uneducated, silly comments made by people using social media. But then we have already been told, rightly and sadly so, that social media has made invasion of the idiot possible into places where expert advice is to be considered. Somebody said, one of the chief ministers said, we will have to live with the virus. And people started making fun of that. But we do live with viruses. Of the 200 odd viruses identified so far, we live with all of them. We also live with the bacterium that caused the plague. It's still there. Black Death is still around. In Madagascar, in Peru, every year, about 500 people die around the world with Black Death, with the plague. Some 15, 16 years ago, I think, they found plague in Surat, in Gujarat. We live with viruses. We live with diseases. The point is, are we able to handle them? And for that, not prayer, not petition, not simply quarantine, which is an immediate step to take, of course, but immunity that is developed in us through vaccination is what is needed. By the way, there are claims that kid Abhigya has done a master's level, postgraduate level education from a virtual university, Vedic university, in Ayurvedic microbiology. The doctors amongst you, I will leave it to you to think about what it means to talk about Ayurvedic microbiology. Because the first hints of microbes is just a few hundred years old. Charaka or Susruta had no clue. They had no idea. This I will say particularly to remind friends in Kerala, because all kinds of nonsensical claims about cures for Ayurvedic cures for AIDS and so on come from Kerala. I think our friends in Essence, our friends in the Yuktivadi Sangam, our friends in the science foundations should protect the rest of the country from the quackery claims of Kerala Ayurveda Vaidyas. Ajay Verma is asking, Modi government pushing us to download Buggy Arogya Setu app. What should we do? I believe the app is optional. Why would you ask me what you should do? You say there is a bug, which is different from the virus, of course, and we know that it is optional. I should leave it to your discretion. But the most important thing one would do is maintain social distancing from fellow persons, members of the same family also during this crisis, if they are going out of the house for any reason and coming back. And in Andhra Pradesh, a poet wrote a stupid song extolling the practice of cleanliness, let us say, of isolating women from the others during their period, and saying these are the traditions of the Brahmins, which now the world is adopting. The world, to save itself, has now adopted Brahminical practices. So as I said, ancient prejudices, stupidities, superstitions, all of them come out. And if we don't respond to them in a responsible way, they will take root. So we have to address them. Ravi Kumar ji is asking, since the corona carrying is carried out through droplets, how does high humidity affect it? These are questions for an expert, and as I indicated, there are limits to the knowledge I carry about this, but I must cause some worry for you when I mention that studies in France have found coronavirus, novel coronavirus, in water bodies. Now, if it is transmitted through droplets when you cough, water is bearing the virus in it. And they are saying there are some, it has not been a widely replicated study or examination, but there are some who have found the virus in water. Now, that is a matter of great concern. What would high humidity do? We don't know. There is not enough knowledge about this virus. The first cases were in November. As Mr. Verma pointed out earlier, China has not been very open about it and punished the first doctor. Sadly, that hero died of the same problem, and he was not an old man. He was in his 30s. So, age is not going to be a guarantee for one's immunity. There is also some talk about those who have had BCG vaccine, that they would show natural immunity. I wouldn't know enough to say anything about it beyond saying BCG is a vaccination against a bacterium, not against a virus. In fact, when the virus, this COVID-19 virus, is defeated by a vaccine, that would not possibly be effective against a mutant of this virus. So I don't know if what applies to a bacterium applies to a virus, because antibiotics do nothing. For example, it's not a very serious example, but antibiotics do not kill viruses. Syamdev ji is asking opinion about defending methods adopted in Kerala and the output. I have been inspired by the care that was shown by the government of Kerala, the responsibility that was shown in how a crisis like this can be handled. But then Kerala has had several decades of solid investment in public health infrastructure. And that certainly has helped. Whether this can be handled everywhere else in the country depends on how many resources are available that can be deployed for handling this situation. But Kerala's model of approach, and I think indeed, though implementation has been brutal because of the lack of proper training of the enforcement personnel, the lockdown of the country too, I think had to happen. As I said, I would think in an educated country, society, less brutal measures, less all-encompassing models can be used for containing. It should certainly be not brutal at all, but it had to be strictly implemented in India. We have seen how many came out at the end of the Janata curfew. We know how many have been congregating outside, how many carried out various meetings even after the lockdown was announced, some of them politicians. So sadly, we are not a compliant nation. I see in Australia, people are really obeying what the government has been recommending, what the doctors have been saying. That is because it's a country with 100% literacy. It's a largely secular society. There would be probably more humanist, rationalist, secularists than there would be religious fundamentalists in this country. And that really supports and helps public policy. Not that people have not been irresponsible. In Bondi Beach in Sydney, there have been 20,000 people on the beach, and they were not listening. And that was a trigger for imposing a partial lockdown. And then things started falling in place. VB Rajan ji is asking, what is the future of our human gods? Like their past, they've never existed, they will not be around. But don't be surprised, do not be surprised if at one point Corona becomes a god. Already, novel Corona, COVID-19 I'm talking of. Already we are being told that, or reminded, that the diseases, the common pandemics of India, were all named after gods, goddesses, sadly, and prayers to them was how people tried to handle the pandemics. Those who know these names are also the ones who say that we have natural immunity, that nothing of this kind will ever happen, forgetting that the world's largest cholera epidemic started with a Kumbh Mela in India in the 1800s. It went around the world. Sadly, nobody who was in the Kumbh Mela wanted to spread it. They had no idea. But it's a consequence of the lack of hygiene. Typhoid, cholera, they spread because there is not enough health consciousness in people. So is the case with COVID-19. Rajesh Kumar ji is asking, if the virus is mutating, is this vaccine which is in test going to be effective? Unfortunately, like the flu vaccine, which every year has to be updated with new mutants, this will have limited ability to control COVID-19 when it is no longer COVID-19 but one of its variants. Sadly, that is a huge challenge. If they have found enough mutants already now, the vaccine they will develop will be not for one single, not the G strain, but also for the B strain and newer ones as well. Virender Aluwala is asking, social or physical distancing? Well, in India, we have the sorry situation where when we say social distancing, people have started interpreting it as meaning the distance that social classes, castes, had been maintaining between and amongst themselves in our sadly fractured hierarchical casteist society. For fear of misinterpretation, maybe we should say physical distancing, but we all know what we are talking about. It's for the idiots that we have to make clear that when we say social distancing, we mean physical distancing. Jayakrishnan Sridharanji is saying, which I believe is your, I am sorry, that question seems not to be complete. Maybe it's a reference to something else. Ajay Vermaji, thank you for the love from India. Accept from here my virtual cyber hugs. Take care. But don't hug people in reality. Stay at a distance and throw a flying kiss. Nothing more than that. I think we have probably exceeded the time allocated to us. It was announced to be 30 minutes, I think, with interaction to be followed. Every Sunday, India time 4:30, on my personal account in Facebook, that's Babu Gogineni with a tick mark, I do a Facebook live conversation with friends. About 400, 500 people log in at any time. End of the session, there are probably 1,000 people who had logged in. And we speak usually in Telugu, but also in English about various things. So friends who feel like who feel like listening to some Telugu, learning a little bit of it, or discussing in English some of the issues of the week, you're welcome. What I did last Sunday was do a humanist analysis of Ayn Rand. Ayn Rand, the objectivist, popular writer, thinker, novelist, cinema script writer. I am not impressed by that person, and I've had the opportunity to analyze what she has said and the damage it has done to a serious approach to establishing a better society. Despite her promoting reason, despite her epistemology being completely in tune with what rationalists, humanists, materialists think. We probably have addressed all the questions that have come, or are there any? Jay Krishnan ji is asking, will there be more such lives on astrology, pseudoscience? Yes, we do those. As I just mentioned, your question may have come before I said this. So take this as a response to that question of yours. Every Sunday, India time, 4:30 in this season, and later in the year at 5:30, we do a couple of hours every week of discussing and responding to questions of this kind. Oh yes, on astrology, pseudoscience, most certainly. You're welcome. Please join us there. And because my friends join from different parts of the world, last time it was people from Ireland, the US, and in Poland, I had to switch to some Telugu a little, from Telugu into English. Ravichandran ji also came in. So we were in the heat of a discussion about Ayn Rand. So I just explained to him that now is not the time, I will speak Malayalam. And we continued in Telugu there. As a developing economy, Radhakrishnan ji, Karunakaran ji is asking, as a developing economy, how India is going to be affected by the lockdown. Would it bring any results if we extend it further? Is it advisable? A strict lockdown, a real lockdown, will most certainly help. There is no doubt about it. But competence in implementing it is the most important thing in this matter. I fear that it is not being implemented as it should have been. Now, as a developing economy, whether developed or developing, saving lives is part of saving a country. There is no doubt about it in my mind. How it is to be implemented is the question. Now, I'm giving a very crude summary suggestion. The way to do it is what they did with John Maynard Keynes' ideas immediately after the World War. Something that Abhijit Mukherjee ji, the Nobel laureate, said to Rahul Gandhi in the conversation they had, I think released today or yesterday, but I watched it today. You have to pump in money into the market. You have to put money in people's hands. You have to make people spend that money. And then that will prime the economy and make things move forward. So this is the only way we can handle this. And whether politicians or others, when people say we have to live with this virus, accept it. We have to live with this virus. We lived with smallpox for a long time. We still have the plague, but in pockets. The most important thing is to get that vaccine. and to rush that vaccine through the proper protocols. Ebola, after 4.5 years, got a vaccine this last month. End of April, it was declared. They are trying to rush this through, maybe dispense with certain steps in the testing protocol, because if anybody is dying anyway, then you don't bother about side effects. Then you try to help that person. Let's see if I have any other questions that are missed. There is Sravanti Prasad's question. One more thing I can add. There is this concept of herd immunity. Now, if a significant number of people in the population are already have been infected but did not develop the disease, were able to clear it, then you have, if a significant numbers of people have it, then there is no way that the virus will pass the barrier that is established by those who have resistance to it, right? So if you get the virus and then your body clears it, that means your antibodies fight it and clear it and kill it, then you're not going to spread it. So you then become the one who is breaking the chain of transmission. If a lot of people have immunity, then the chain will not hold. It will be broken. That is herd immunity. So, Sravanti Prasadji, I think we are to look at it. Britain made the mistake of expecting it very quickly, very soon, and in the beginning. As a consequence, Prince Charles had it, and the Prime Minister Boris Johnson had it, and I think the Health Secretary or one of the top ministers in Boris Johnson's government also had it. No, one doesn't rush into it as a policy just because it sounds good. It should be sound scientifically too. So herd immunity is to be hoped for and expected. And if a huge number of people in society are given the right vaccine, also there we get herd immunity. If a huge number of people are exposed to this virus and they develop immunity naturally, it's not as if that is a guarantee. That also will help. Sanjay Ramna Rao Garu is asking, does China have medicine? Can we get medicine in next 3 months? I'm not aware of anyone anywhere in the world having a medicine which is newly developed for novel corona virus. Combination drugs of previously used antivirals might work, but no responsible, scientifically conducted test and research has led us in that direction. Sadly. Will we have something in 3 months? Well, when they say human trials have started, we are saying they are testing some medicines. Some humans, some doctors have volunteered to have the medicine. But whether it is approved for public use will depend on the outcome of the human trials. Is a medicine available? Something that is offered as a medicine is now available. Even in Hyderabad, Bharat Biotech is involved in developing a medicine. But it has to go through animal and human testing protocols to see what side effects there might be. But like I said, when somebody is dying, you don't look at side effects. You just do what you can to help them. Can we expect a medicine in next 3 months? A medicine available for you and me? Definitely not. Unless it's a combination that is proved to be right and that is rushed through testing protocols of existing medicines. But we don't know. Chetan, Chand B. Anand is saying, for the sake of India, why can't we perform a wide COVID-19? Is it due to lack of funds? Certainly it's lack of funds. Certainly it's a lack of equipment. Certainly it's a lack of personal protection equipment, simply because we have not invested as much as we should be in our health infrastructure. Doctors don't have personal protection. Some of my closest friends in my personal life are doctors. So I am personally worried for my friends, saying they're exposed to this. People like us, we are safe in the sense we are at home. But the frontline workers, and that doesn't mean simply doctors, all the healthcare professionals, and certainly the sanitation workers who are keeping our cities still clean, exposing themselves as they have always done to the vilest of circumstances and insanitary conditions. The policemen, even though often they betray the lack of training, which is their condition and situation, who are also in the front line, trying to keep a semblance of order everywhere. Some of the media people, the ones who are not spreading nonsensical stories. And nonsensical stories include the kind of rumors they were spreading, including that of the demise or near death of Kim Jong-un, North Korea's leader. Everyone taking advantage and trying to attack somebody else. Remember again what Camus said. Humans are dying. Will humanity remain? Will humanity be alive? Humanity, to distinguish itself from the others, will have to show kindness and compassion and human values and use reason and take responsibility. If we are able to show all that, then that would be something. Chandrasekhar Azad Garu is asking, please comment about rapid kits, exactly result. You should ask the experts about this. I think there are some controversies on procurement linked to corruption and hastiness in decision. Sanjay Ramana Rauji is asking, is it a bio war? This is a conspiracy theory for sure, unless you have some solid evidence. Some people have mentioned that in China, in a laboratory, maybe by mistake, the virus escaped. Because 4 years ago, some researcher sent a cable from the embassy or a consulate of the United States to their headquarters saying unhygienic conditions are being maintained. Surely it's not a war if it happened by mistake. What we know, at least what I know and understand, is that the exact same genetic sequence as found in bats is what was found in humans. So it is very likely that it went from, as has been said from the beginning, from an animal to a human. When you get the plague, it is also the same. Rodents, fleas, they bite the human and they pass it on to the human. From an animal to a human. If it is bubonic plague, the person just dies. If it is also to do with the pulmonary tract and then gives you pneumonic plague, then because of pneumonia, then human to human transmission is possible. Do not look for conspiracies there or chemical warfare and bio war there. When AIDS, HTLV3, which became HIV in nomenclature, Robert Gallo, as I mentioned to you, was involved in it when HTLV3 was the nomenclature. I had the privilege of attending a lecture by him at the Center for Cellular Molecular Biology in Hyderabad, India. when they were talking about this virus, the conspiracy theorists started saying this is something Americans have sent to Africa. And what can we do? Conspiracy theorists will tell us that you never went to the moon. They will tell you all kinds of nonsensical things. Some of them will tell us aliens are around to abduct us, to kidnap us. Those are illnesses. That's not social analysis. It's suspicion gone mad, wild, and you must treat it like that. Ajay Verma Garu, thank you. Whatever you do, don't die, and don't die of COVID-19. Good to see that comment from you. Not your comment that WHO is a joke, though. It's not. Someone said voice is not clear, but I think it was quite clear. Acharya Vemu is asking, the Indian soothsayer, Brahmam, Veera Brahmendra Swami, so he's saying soothsayer Brahmam Garu, said that it comes through the air, and does it mean that it came by flight? Can we interpret it like that? Well, we can find 1,000 ways of justifying something. If he really said Korangi, he did not say COVID, right? If he said Korangi, he did not say coronavirus, right? Number one. He said it'll come by air, and he said it'll come from the east. And he said it'll be poisonous air, Vishapugali. Now, it did not come from the east as far as Japan is concerned, number one. Number two, if you say that it is coming from the flight is not poison. You can sit and find 1,000 ways of trying to find something in what was not meant. The so-called predictions of this person, the so-called predictions of Veera Brahmendra Swami are also that. He only described what was happening around him. He was a social scientist for his age and a social reformer. But it is impossible to predict anything which is not based on a scientific model, which is based on facts. It is not true. It cannot be accepted. Vishwanath Jayanti, the virus keeps mutating, and we have identified 30 plus types of strains as of now. So Sweden's model may not work for India. Unless citizens, people, humans, members of society take responsibility for their behavior, no model will work. Neither lockdown nor the Sweden model. But compared to other countries in Europe, Sweden has not done badly, and life has been going on well. Friends, I think we have looked at all the questions, and I have said what I wanted to. Yes, thank you for logging in and listening and for exchanging some of your ideas. I look forward to interactions in future as well. Be safe. Please wear the mask. Scientific advice is changing, so please follow what the advice is. At one point they said the mask is only for certain kinds of people. Especially if you have the infection, you should wear the mask. Others need not have it. Now they are very clear. All of us should wear the masks. Social distancing, absolutely clear. Washing hands properly, nicely, up to the elbow if possible. All your hands, parts, all your nails, the spaces between the fingers, all of this have to be taken care of. Experts like Muralidharanji will be able to explain these things better, but please be sure that the health advice has to be followed. When the lockdown is lifted, only the lockdown is lifted, the virus is still around. Please do not forget that. Immunity probably exists already, then lucky you. Some of us will not be around at the end of this. That may be 6 months from now, couple of years from now, if we don't have the immunity. But remember also that humanity has always overcome these challenges. Half of Europe was eliminated in the 1300s. It took 200 years for the UK in the 1600s to simply replenish the labor force, the number of people that it had lost in the Great Plague. And the plague came to Europe first. It came from the Netherlands to England. Europe took 200 years to recover from it. Empires fell. Justinian's empire fell. So it's not going to be easy. But the fact is, when in the year 1 of this common era, if the entire world was around 5 to 10 crores, there is always disputes about what exact numbers there would be. We might even say 15 crores, doesn't matter. It doesn't matter for us. There is expertise in calculating, but there are disagreements amongst the experts. I have used the figure 5 crores previously, 50 million. Today, we are close to 8 billion. We are a very successful race. We've done very well. Nowhere in humanity's history have been more people alive today than ever. More healthy people than ever. More people with human rights than ever. More coordinated action amongst humans than ever. We have the best chance today of fighting this problem. In the last 500 years, humanity has defeated each and every pandemic it had. Only after they stopped praying to the gods and invoking the planets and making planetary conjunctions as the cause for the origin of viruses. And everywhere in the world, we are there. Even Saudi Arabia cancelled the pilgrimage to its country. Remember that. A long time ago, an emperor died of the plague, a Roman emperor. Today, when Prince Charles was infected, he came out of it. Boris Johnson too. Millions of youngsters have come out of it. We are distracted by the jokers. We are distracted by the clowns. But the real work is going on. In Israel, not every country, not every society, not every people are discussing religion and caste and discrimination and ancient rishis and their powers. People are actually working on getting solutions to real human problems. So it is with a sense of optimism and personal hope that it won't damage us personally, our families, and our friends, that we should look forward. And if we are remaining at home, we might be hungrier than we earlier were, but we would still be alive. Just hang on till they get the virus eliminated through a proper, a real immunization scheme. Remember that 70 years, 50 years ago, polio was the scourge of the world. Where is polio today? Except in Nigeria, Afghanistan, and parts of Pakistan, where religious groups have been fighting the introduction of vaccination. And in Malappuram, in Kerala. As long as we get that big virus out of our lives, of ignorance, of defiance of facts and truth, we'll all be all right. So thank you very much for your patience. Thank you for staying on. And I hope to speak to you once again sometime, whenever Essence has a possibility. Thank you so much.